Welcome back to our topic of macroeconomic management and sustainable development. In the last class, we have discussed the various factors which influence the disaster risk, namely the hazards, the vulnerabilities, and the exposures. And we have seen different types of vulnerabilities and what factors should be constituted in evaluating the disaster risk. We have seen the social and also economic vulnerabilities and the factors which are associated with that. In the current lecture, the outcome of this lecture will be the role of understanding the role of mitigation and preparedness in reducing the disaster impacts. I hope by the end of this lecture, you will be able to explain the role of mitigation and preparedness in reducing the impact created by a disaster. As we have seen this disaster management cycle, which we have gone through in our second unit and unit number 1 and unit number 2, the first two stages of the disaster management cycle, these are mitigation and preparedness. Even though prevention was also there, if in most of the cases we cannot prevent the disasters, the natural disasters. So what we can do is nothing but mitigate the disasters, and we must be in a prepared position before the onset of the disaster. As we can see, disaster risk can be reduced if, see the 4 points here, disaster risk can be reduced if exposures are moved away from the area which is being hit by the disasters. See the coastal regions, immediately before the start of the floods or cyclones, immediately the people who are there, they will be shifted to some high areas. Why? Because the exposures will be reduced. If they still stay there at the beaches, then automatically what happens? The exposures will be very high. So there will be huge amount of loss of life. So that's why the first point is exposures are to be moved away. The second thing is vulnerability levels are reduced. So vulnerability levels are to be reduced. As we have seen, there are different vulnerability terms which are associated. So all these things, vulnerabilities, whether it is a social vulnerability or economic vulnerability, in turn poverty or education or whatever, all these vulnerability levels are to be reduced, which means that you are supposed to push this HDL, Human Development Index, higher. So vulnerabilities are to be reduced. Effective macroeconomic management. This is the most important thing. The country must have abundant resources. The employability of the people must be very high, which means that more amount of money must be flowing in the country. High GDP, high employment level, high literacy levels. So high profitable things. So effective macroeconomic management. Then only risk can be reduced. And environmental conservation measures. Actually, it was conservation measures. It's a little bit mistake there. Environmental conservation measures. The country is taking good environmental conservation measures, then the happening of the natural hazards will be less. So on the whole, what we can say, move away the exposures, try to reduce our vulnerabilities, try to effectively manage your economical and financial resources, and if possible, try to conserve the environment. So if we do all these things, then automatically the disaster risk can be reduced. So if you can see, as we have already stated, that the risk is a function of hazards, vulnerabilities, and exposures. If all these three are high, then risk will be high. These are all directly proportional to the risk. On the other hand, if you see, there are two terms, mitigation and preparedness. If we do mitigate the risk hazards, if we are well prepared, then we can reduce the risk. See, that's why I see that these will come in the denominator, which means that they are inversely proportional to the risk. If there is a high mitigation, high preparedness, then automatically the risk can be reduced. So that's what the function is modified there in the last equation there. See, the risk is a function of all these three terms which we have seen. These are directly proportional. See, now the mitigation and preparedness come here. Now see here, if we do reduce, see, we are driving away the exposures. That's what the first point was. See the first point, exposures are moved away and vulnerability levels are reduced. That's what see here. Exposures are being moved away and the vulnerability levels are reduced. See what is happening now. Earlier this was the level. Now what you are doing, you are trying to reduce the risk. This is what is happening. This is a very clear picture of how to reduce the impact of a disaster. So now, how to get an economic recovery? This is the most important thing which is being looked after in the Google in the recent past. In the case of COVID-19 also, how to quickly recover our economies. So, as we can see in the first point itself, economic recovery after a disaster depends upon the country's capacity and capability to recapture the lost growth as quickly as possible. So, whatever the growth which you have lost in the recent past during the time of your disaster, how much capacity you do have to recover that thing. How much energy do you have? How much capability you do have in recovering the things. So, this plays an important role in economic recovery of any unit or a country. So, on what factors does this economic recovery depend upon? See the important terms there which are being mentioned. You are supposed to have very strong economic performance. You are supposed to have economic diversification initiatives, national and regional risk transfer systems, economic integration, appropriate national policies, and saving and consumption pattern of the citizens. This is the biggest problem. I'll take an example. This is the biggest problem of the US. US people, most of the people, they don't have the habit of most amount of savings. If we implement the lockdown, then immediately they will start running for riots. They'll create some riots and they'll start running for food here and there. Why? Because they don't have the habit of savings too much amount of money. But whereas in a country like us, where we do mostly concentrate on the savings and policies and other things in getting some assets, so that's why even if we do have this 6 weeks of lockdown also, most of the people are getting sufficient amount of food because we are spending the savings which we have done so far. So that's why saving and consumption pattern of citizens also, it will help in the economic recovery of a nation. So all these are the factors which do affect the economic recovery of a nation. If we do have strong measures, there's all these economic performances, then we can easily recover from a disaster. On the other hand, how to recover very quickly? You may expect a foreign assistance. Now, in case it is not possible because all the countries are being affected by the COVID-19. But let us suppose if no country is being affected by the disaster, and if you do have a problem with the disaster, then you can go with the foreign assistance. See, the role of foreign assistance. Quick international response, it raises working spirits of the affected. And relief assistance in the form of aid flows and debt relief can also raise hope of quicker recovery and early resumption of active economic growth. So, if aid comes in and if there is a relief of a debt of your nation, then automatically you can go with a very quick economic recovery. It has been proved in the recent past also. You can take a best example of Italy. Last year, it was 2 years back, I think. It was on the verge of collapsing economically. The EU, European Union, it has given some more amount of loan and it has tried to reduce its debts. And there was a good amount of cash flow into that nation. Otherwise, Italy would have gone by now. Italy, Spain. Now, these countries, since they are not considered on their economic recoveries, even after getting an aid from the European Union, see now these are being affected a lot. Now, next, going ahead, what are the issues to be considered now for economic management and risk reduction? You can see there the activities from the structural inventions to community-based disaster management. These should be coordinated. And collaboration among the stakeholders to promote initiatives of disaster risk reduction. This is the most important thing. You are supposed to promote the initiatives of collaboration among the stakeholders. Your ultimate goal is nothing but you are supposed to reduce the disaster risk. So that's why you try to involve more amount of stakeholders, make a platform that they can work collaboratively, and try to enhance the public awareness. And what is it? Understanding. Let the people understand what do you mean by disaster risk and how disaster risk is to be evaluated. Let the people understand. Try to create more amount of public awareness. then only you can try to reduce this economic risk reductions. And you are supposed to develop some disaster risk reduction framework. And you are supposed to, already there are many frameworks like HFA, UNDAF, etc., etc. So you are supposed, if you don't have any particular framework developed for your country, then better you establish some strong linkages to this existing frameworks. And the most important thing, the stronger lobbying at the regional level for investment in disaster reduction. You are supposed to invest too much amount of money for disaster reductions, and you are supposed to invest in for development to transform commitment into best practice. It's not about just commitment, yet is you are supposed to follow that and make it as a best practice. And you are supposed to have a future vision of real time disasters among communities and highlighting the best disaster risk management practices, a good future vision. And you are supposed to properly coordinate between the resources and the needs. And you are supposed to plan. Pre-disaster recovery planning is most important. The people have a session of brainstorming, think what is required, and think how to utilize the resources which are available. Plan accordingly, develop a framework, and then you can quickly recover from any disaster. So, concluding, capacity of developing countries like in Asia has to be improved with respect to economic and social views. Because if a disaster hits it, then automatically they may experience a very big economic crisis. So for the developing countries, you are supposed to improve your economic and social views. And as most of the reports say, most of the victims of the natural disasters, they come from very poor and vulnerable communities whose individual capacity to overcome their impacts are extremely limited. So try to improve your human development levels of a country. Even though the primary job is to assist the affected people, more importance is to be given to preparedness of the community and mobilization efforts. As we have seen that there are 4 stages in a disaster management cycle, try to concentrate on the first 2 to reduce the risk of the disaster, mitigation and preparedness. Those 2 are the most important things. A good preparedness rapidly enhances the effectiveness of international assistance, which is provided to countries affected by natural disasters. As we have seen, preparedness is most important. So that's all for today, and you can see the assignments. These are the assignment questions. You can go through these assignment questions. You can submit them before the due dates. Thank you all.